Hello guys, welcome to my channel. This is part 44 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this video, we will discuss the difference between AddSingleton, AddScoped, and AddTransient methods in ASP.NET Core with an example. This is the same application that we have been working with so far. In this video series. Here is our iEmployee repository interface. In this example, we only be using these two methods. Get all employees and add. As the name implies, this get all employee method returns us the list of all employees. And this add method adds the new employee that we provide to this method. As an argument to our repository, and this is just the interface. Here is the class. Here is the class that implements our interface. iEmployee repository. Here is the implementation for add method. As you can see, the new employee object that we are providing as an argument to this add method, it is adding that employee to the private field. Underscore employee list, which is obviously a list of employee object. And then if we look at get all employee method, this method is returning us the list of all employee. That we have. Again, in this private field, underscore employee list, The important point to keep in mind is this is an in-memory list. The important thing to keep in mind is this is an in-memory list. This is an in-memory list. Meaning every time we restart our application, we'll lose the chance, will lose the changes that we make to this private field underscore employee list. Meaning, every time we restart our application, we'll lose the changes that we make to this private field underscore employee list. Whenever we create an instance of this class, mock employee repository, obviously its constructor obviously its constructor is called, this is the constructor, its constructor is called, and as you can see within the constructor we are initializing this private field. We are initializing this private field underscore employee list with 3 employees. With 3 employee objects to start with. Here is our program.cs file. Here is our program.cs file, and within this file we have our registered the service here. Why we are using this program.cs file? There should be a startup.cs file. So guys, in 2022 Visual Studio and later version, startup file is not being used, generally not being used, and every coding in the startup.cs file is now done in program.cs file. As you know that in startup.cs file we have a startup class, and within that class ConfigureService method, as the name implies, function configure service we use to configure service required for our application. So now instead of using a startup.cs file, we are going to configure service required for our application in the program.cs file. So we have configured our service here, required service, as you can see that. At the moment, we have this interface. At the moment, we have this interface, employee repository. And this mock And this mock employee repository class provides the implementation for that interface. And this mock employee repository class provides the implementation for that interface. So to tie these two together, these two together, we are using AddSingleton. We are using AddSingleton method of this interface. So we are using AddSingleton method basically by including this line here. By including this line here, we are saying if someone asks for if someone asks for employee repository, then provide them an instance of this mock employee repository class in addition to AddSingleton method. We also have these two methods, AddScoped and AddTransient. For now, let's use this AddSingleton method and see the behavior that we get. Here is our home controller. Notice the home controller. Notice the home controller. The home controller has a dependency on iEmployee repository. We are injecting iEmployee repository into the home controller using its constructor. Using its constructor, we are then using this injected dependency within the create action method. Within the create action method. That responses to the HTTP post request. Here is our create employee. Here is our create employee form. After we provide all the details of the new employee and then we click this create button, this form is posted to the server. This HTTP post request is handled by this create method, by this create action method. The new employee that we want to create is passed as a the new employee that we want to create is passed as a parameter to this create action method, which we are then passing to this which we are then passing to the add method of employee repository This method adds it to the employee repository. Adds to the employee repository. After we have successfully added the employee, object to the repository, we are then redirecting the user to the detail action method. So we could see the details of that. Newly added employee. For the time being, let's not redirect the user to the details actions. After we successfully added the employee, we want to stay on the create view itself. So let's comment this line. Which redirect us to the details action method. So we have commented this line which redirect us to the details action method. Next, on our create view, we want to display the total number of employees that we have in our employee repository. So where is the create view? This is our create view. So next, on our create view, we want to display the total number of employees that we have in our employee repository. For that, let's make a copy of this div element. So copy this div element. and then change the bit that are required. We want to display the total employees count right here. We don't need another create button. We don't need another create button. So let's get rid of that first. We want to include that literal text, total employees count. Total employees count is equal to total employee counts equals. Now there are several approaches to compute the total number of employees that we have in our employee repository. The approach that I am going to take is inject employee repository service into this view as well. Now remember to inject the employee repository service into home controller. Now remember to inject the employee repository service, employee repository service into home controller. We are using the constructor. To be able to inject a service into view. So to be able to inject a service into view, we use @inject directive. We use @inject directive. In our case, the service that we want to inject is employee repository. In our case, we want to inject. In our case, the service that we want to inject is employee repository. Let's call the variable. Let's call the variable underscore employee repository. Underscore employee repository. That is the variable. We can now use the service instance to compute the total number of employees. So at this location, we want to switch to C# mode. So at this location, we want to switch to C# mode. So we use @ on this service. On this service, we have get all employees. On this service, we have get all employee. On this service, we have get all employee method, which is going to return us the list of all employee on this when we use the count method. So which is going to return us the list of all employees on this when we use the count method. We get the total number of employees. We get the total number of employees. Now, here is the important bit to understand. After we provide the details of the new employee that we want to create and issue a post request by clicking this create button to handle this post request, our application needs an instance of iEmployee repository. Our application needs an instance of iEmployee repository in two places. First, within our home controller in this create action method, that responds to the post request. That responds to the post request. So to be able to add the new employee, to our employee repository, we need an instance of iEmployee repository. iEmployee repository service. Next, we also need an instance of this service. Next, we also need an instance of this service in our create view. Next, we also need an instance of this service in our view. in our view, in our create view. Why do we need it? Why do we need it in the create view? To be able to compute the total number of employees that we have in the employee repository. And at the moment, we have registered our service. We have registered our service using AddSingleton method. So with all these changes in place, let's see the behavior that we get. So with all these changes in place, let's see the behavior that we get. So save everything, save it. Notice when we issue a GET request to /home/create, what happened? We need to build the solution. So notice when we issue, nothing is happening. Okay, now it is. So notice when we issue a GET request to /home /home/create, we see the total employee count is 3. You see the total employee count is 3. Let's understand what is happening behind the scene. To serve this request, an instance of home controller is created. To serve this request, an instance of home controller is created. And if we take a look at our home controller, and if we take a look at our home controller, notice it has a dependency. It has a dependency on I-employee repository. This is the first time an instance of I-employee repository is requested. So ASP.NET Core creates an instance of the class that implements this interface. As you can see in this AddSingleton method, in our case, an instance of mock employee repository class is created and injected into the home controller. We have issued a GET request to the create action of our home controller. We have issued a GET request to the create action of our home controller. So within our home controller, within our home controller. So within our home controller, this is the create action method. This is the create action method that handles the incoming HTTP GET request. All we are doing within this action method is executing return view statement. Since the name of the action method is create, this create view this create view is then executed. If we scroll the way to the top, you can see this view also has a also has a dependency on iEmployee repository. Since we are using AddSingleton method, since we are using AddSingleton method, to register our service, instead of creating another instance of this, mock employee repository class for the create view, it is going to reuse the instance. That ASP.NET Core has created when this home controller has first requested an instance of iEmployee repository. So that same instance will also be injected into create view. The view then uses the service instance to calculate the total number of employees. If you recollect, when we create an instance of this service, within the constructor, we are populating this private field. We are populating this private field underscore employee list underscore employee three underscore employee list with three employee object with three employee objects. So the total count of employee that we see here is the total count of employee that we see here is 3. Now let's add a new employee and see what happens to the total count. Notice, so let's add a new employee. Now let's add a new employee and see what happens to the total count. Notice when I click the create button, the total employee count is 4. If I click it again, it increases to 5. One more time, 6. It goes on. So every time we click this button, the employee count increases by 1. The important point to keep in mind is every time we click this create button, we are issuing a new HTTP request. We are issuing a new HTTP request. Since we are using AddSingleton method to register our service, there is only one instance of the service created when the application first requests an instance of the service. That instance is then reused throughout our application across all the HTTP requests. That is the reason every time we click this create button, the total employees count increases by 1. Within with a singleton service. With a singleton service. With a singleton service, there is only a single instance. An instance is created when the service is first requested. And that single instance is used by all HTTP requests throughout the application. Now let's use AddScoped method instead of AddSingleton. So go back to program.cs file. So now let's use AddScoped method instead of AddSingleton method. So let's use AddScoped method instead of AddSingleton method to register our service and see the behavior that we get. Let's save this. Let's save this. With a scoped service, we get the same instance within the scope of a given HTTP request, but a new instance across different HTTP requests. Let's understand what this means with an example. We made a change to our application code. So when we issue a GET request, so I think we need to first build the solution. It is appropriate to build the solution first and go back to the browser. So when we issue a GET request, the application restart. First of all, we need to refresh it. Okay. So when we issue a GET request, the application restart and we should see the count of employee 3. So issue a GET request. Click here after localhost 7014/home/create. Now press enter. So look at here. We should see the count of employee as 3. There we go. Now let's provide details of a new employee. So provide a new employee details. And click the create buttons. So click the create button. Notice the employee count increases to 4 from this point, no matter how many times we click this create button. So click once again this. Look at here, no effect is being seen here. So no matter how many times we click this create button, the total employees count stays at 4. Let's understand why we are getting this behavior. When we issued a GET request, to /home/create, we get a new service instance because remember with a scoped service, every new HTTP request gets a new instance with a new service instance. We are 3 employee objects. With a new service instance, we are 3 employee objects. So when we issue a get request to /home/create, we saw the total count. We saw the total count as 3. Within provided the details of a new employee and then issued a post request by clicking the create button. When we issue a post request within our home controller, when we issue a post request within our home controller, this is the create action method. This is the create action method that handles that incoming post request. Remember, when we issue a post request, it is another new request. It is another new request. So we get another new instance of service with a new instance of this service. So we get another new instance of service with a new instance of the service. By default, we have a total 3 employees. By default, so we get another new instance of service with a new instance of this service. By default, with a new instance of service, by default, we have a total of 3 employees. We have a total of 3 employees. Okay. By default, we have a total of 3 employees. With a new instance of the service, by default, we have a total of 3 employees. But then the create view within our home controller is adding another new employees. Is adding another new employee. So that total count increases to 4. So that total count increases to 4. Our create view can see that increased count. Our create view can see that increased count because after adding the employee, because after adding the employee to the employee repository, we are re-rendering the create view. We are re-rendering the create view. And if we take a look at the create view, and if we take a look at the create view also has a dependency, I employee repository service. But here a new instance of the service will not be provided. But here a new instance of the service will not be provided. The instance that we have used to add the employee, the instance that we have used to add the employee to the employee repository. That same instance is reused in the create view. Why is that? Well, that because both these actions that is adding the employee to the employee repository and rendering this create view are happening as part of the same HTTP request. They are happening in the same scope of that HTTP request. And remember, with a scoped service, we get the same instance within the scope of a given HTTP request. But a new instance across different HTTP requests. So when this create button is clicked, so when this create button is clicked, adding this new employee to the employee repository and re-rendering this create view both these actions are happening in the scope of this same HTTP post request. So we see the total count increased to 4. After the value is increased to 4, no matter how many times we click this button, create button, this button this create button, the count does not go beyond 4. The count does not go beyond 4. Why is that? Well, that is because every time we click this create button, we issue a new HTTP request. And remember, with the scoped service, with the scoped service, with every new HTTP request, we get a new service instance, and with a new service instance, the default initials and with a new service instance, the default initial count of employee is 3. The default initial count of employee is 3. And when we click the create button, we add the 4th employee. So we see the total employee count as 4. Next time I click the create button, we get another new service instance. And with that new service instance, again, the initial count of employee is 3. We add a new employee. The count becomes 4. And that's what we see in the browser. So every time we click the create button, the same process repeats. And hence the count does not go beyond 4, because with every request, a new service instance is created with a scoped service. Now let's use AddTransient method. Now let's use AddTransients method. So go back to program.cs file and now let's use AddTransient method instead of AddScoped. So let's use AddTransient method instead of. So let's use AddTransient method instead of AddScoped method to register our service and see the behavior that we get. So first save it and go back to the browser. But before going to browser, build the solution. Build this solution and go back to the browser immediately. And see the behavior that we get. With a transient service, a new instance is provided every time an instance is requested, whether it is in the scope of the same HTTP request or across different HTTP requests. Notice when we issue a GET request, notice when we issue a GET request, to /home/create, we see three. We see 3 as the total count of employees. Now let's provide the details of a new employee and click the create button. So again, provide the details of a new employee. And click the create button. Notice no matter how many times I click the create button, the total employees count is not moved beyond 3. Notice, no matter how many times I click the create button, the total employees count is not moved beyond 3. Let's understand why this is happening. Let's understand why this is happening. Remember, with a transient service, a new instance. Remember, with a transient service, a new instance is provided every time an instance is requested, whether it is in the scope of the same HTTP request or across different HTTP requests. So if we relate this to our example, notice our home controller is asking for an instance of iEmployee repository with a transient service. We get a brand new instance. So with a new instance of a service, the initial default count of employee is 3. And then the create action within our home controller, and then the create action within our home controller is adding a new employee to the employee repository. So that count becomes 4, and then it re-renders the create view. And if we take a look at the create view, notice the create view is also asking for an instance. And if we take a look at the create view, notice the create view is also asking for an instance. Notice the create view is also asking for an instance of iEmployee repository. Remember, again, with a transient service, every time we ask an instance, we get a brand new instance. So another new instance of the service is created. So another New instance of the service is created, and with this new instance, again the initial count is 3. And that is what we see on the web page. And that is what we see on the web page. So the point that I am trying to make is home controller has its own instance. Home controller has its own instance of service instance. Home controller has its own instance of service instance. And create view has its own instance of the service instance. So this obviously means the change is made by the home controller to its service instance. To its service instance cannot be seen by create view. Cannot be seen by create view. And the vice versa is also true. The table on the slide summarizes the difference between scoped service, transient service, and the singleton service. That's it in this video. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.